Darkness. A muffled sound of metal scraping. Then, the faint, heart-piercing cries of children. On September 21, 2025, in the city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a call came in to emergency services. The report was simple, almost vague. Someone had heard children crying inside a row of storage units. The kind of place you expect to find furniture, dusty boxes, maybe old family heirlooms. But not life. Not children. When firefighters arrived at the scene, they walked between long corridors of corrugated steel doors, each one identical to the next. Echoes bounced off the walls, but there it was again, the unmistakable sobbing of children. They stopped outside Unit 347. The padlock was secure. No light seeped out from inside. No movement. Just the cries. Breaking the lock took only seconds. But what they found inside would haunt them for years. Tonight, Silent Veil takes you into the Milwaukee storage unit case. The shocking discovery, the arrests, the courtroom outrage, and the haunting questions that linger. How did 6 children, the youngest just 2 months old, end up locked inside a metal cell? And how could it have gone unnoticed for so long? The discovery. When the lock snapped and the metal door rolled upward, the firefighters were hit with a stench so overwhelming they had to cover their noses. A sour, rotten odor hung heavy in the stagnant air. Their flashlights cut through the darkness and landed on small figures huddled together. 6 children. A 9-year-old boy. A 7-year-old girl. A 5-year-old. A toddler barely 3. Another child just 2 years old. And an infant, only 2 months old, wrapped in a thin blanket, cradled in the arms of a sibling who was far too young to bear that kind of responsibility. The scene was unimaginable. The storage unit contained a stained mattress pushed against one wall, a sagging sofa, and almost nothing else. No running water. No food in sight. A single bucket placed in the corner, used for human waste. There were no toys, no books, no light bulbs. Just children living in darkness, their only glimpse of the outside world a sliver of daylight slipping through the cracks of the metal door. First responders later said that the cries that led them to the door weren't cries of simple distress, they were cries of hunger, exhaustion, and fear. The older children clung to the younger ones, trying to soothe them, protect them, even as they themselves trembled. The 9-year-old boy, the oldest, tried to speak. He told firefighters that he was the one responsible for watching over the others. He had been told to feed the baby, to keep everyone calm, to wait quietly until his parents returned. But no parents were inside. The unit was locked from the outside. These children had been left there deliberately. Outside, only a few feet away, sat the parents, 33-year-old Charles Dupriest and 26-year-old Isaiah Zielinski. They weren't hiding. They weren't far away. They were asleep inside an SUV, parked casually in the storage facility lot. Their dog lay curled up in the back seat. When officers confronted them, they admitted it without hesitation. Yes, the children were theirs. Yes, they had locked them in the unit. And yes, they had done this before. In their minds, they insisted, this was shelter. They claimed they had been homeless for 6 weeks. The storage unit, they said, was the only place they could keep their children safe from the streets. They had convinced themselves that a locked metal cell was better than exposure. But investigators weren't buying it. The firefighters, hardened by years of rescues and tragedies, later said that of all the emergencies they had faced, this was one of the most disturbing. Because unlike a fire, unlike an accident, this was preventable. These were not victims of chance, they were victims of choice. The discovery made headlines immediately. Local outlets reported on the shocking scene. Photos of the storage facility spread across the internet, rows of ordinary units, indistinguishable from thousands across America. It looked so normal. And that was the most chilling part. Behind those doors, you expect clutter, not children. Yet here they were, hidden in plain sight. In the hours that followed, officers began piecing together the timeline. Neighbors at the facility admitted they had occasionally heard noises. Some thought it was animals. Others dismissed it entirely. Few imagined children were living behind those padlocked doors. One resident would later tell reporters, "We thought maybe someone was sneaking in to store pets. But kids? Never." Once the children were freed, they were immediately taken into protective custody. Medical staff evaluated them for malnutrition, dehydration, and trauma. Thankfully, all 6 survived. But their ordeal had already left invisible scars, scars that experts say could take years to heal. And so the questions began. Why did it take so long for anyone to notice? How could a family of 6 hide inside a facility designed for furniture and forgotten belongings? And perhaps most disturbing, what does it say about a society where children can be treated like objects, stored away, locked up, and left to cry in the dark? This was just the beginning of what would become one of Milwaukee's most shocking cases in recent memory. A case that blurred the line between poverty and crime, between desperation and cruelty, and forced the public to confront uncomfortable truths about neglect, homelessness, and the limits of compassion. Who are the parents and their defense? The couple at the center of this storm are 33-year-old Charles Dupriest and 26-year-old Isaiah Zielinski. By all accounts, they weren't hardened criminals. They weren't fugitives. They were, at least on the surface, ordinary parents. Yet behind that surface lay choices that would horrify an entire community. Charles Dupriest carried the weight of a criminal record. Court filings reveal he had prior convictions, including felonies that barred him from legally owning a firearm. And yet, when police searched the SUV he and Isaiah had been living in, they found a gun. For prosecutors, this was another layer, a man already breaking the law, now accused of endangering his children. Isaiah Zielinski was just 26. A mother of 6 children before reaching 30. Friends described her as quiet, sometimes overwhelmed, sometimes withdrawn. Relatives, according to local reports, had tried to step in before. But Isaiah and Charles kept their distance. By the time the family's troubles came into public view, they had been living in that SUV for weeks. When questioned, the couple's explanation was simple: desperation. They claimed homelessness had left them with no options. Shelters were full. Family couldn't take them in. The storage unit was cheap, private, and in their minds, safe. They insisted they never intended to hurt their children. That locking them inside was a way to protect them from the dangers of the street. But prosecutors painted a different picture. Poverty may explain hardship, they argued, but it does not explain padlocks. It does not explain buckets in corners, children left crying in the dark. As the court commissioner later told them, you had choices. And the choices you made were reckless. You didn't protect your children, you endangered them. In court, the contrast was stark. The parents appeared tired, unkempt, their defense attorneys pleading for compassion. But the details of what investigators had seen inside Unit 347 drowned out sympathy. The commissioner refused to grant lenient bail. Outrage was already spilling across headlines. For many, this wasn't just a story of poverty. It was a story of cruelty. Living conditions and child testimonies. As police and child welfare workers interviewed the children, the extent of their ordeal became clear. The eldest child, only 9, described being placed in charge of his siblings. His role was caretaker, protector, substitute parent. He tried to feed the baby when food was left behind. He tried to comfort the younger ones when the padlock clanged shut. He admitted that sometimes, he told them stories in the dark, anything to keep them quiet so no one outside would hear. Their world was one of shadows and silence. No electricity meant no lamps, no warmth in the chill nights. No running water meant no baths, no clean drinking water. The mattress they slept on was old, stained, and too small to fit them all. Some nights, the older children curled on the sofa, while the toddler and baby shared the mattress. The bucket in the corner, a grim substitute for a bathroom, filled the air with a sour stench that clung to their clothes. Neighbors at the facility later admitted they had heard noises. Crying. Shuffling. But few took action. Some thought it was animals. Others dismissed it as a passing disturbance. In hindsight, the signs had been there. But no one connected the dots until firefighters forced the door open. Investigators also uncovered a disturbing detail: this wasn't a one-time incident. The children had been kept in the unit multiple times over several weeks. Dupriest and Zielinski allegedly locked them inside whenever they needed to leave, sleep, or get things done. For the children, it became routine. Darkness. Waiting. Listening for the sound of the lock to open again. Psychologists warn that the effects of such confinement are lasting. Children deprived of natural light, of stimulation, of freedom, even for days, can develop anxiety, trauma responses, and developmental delays. For the Milwaukee 6, those risks are very real. A 2-month-old baby, experts said, should never have been anywhere near such conditions. And yet, this was the world these children knew. One detail stuck with investigators: the 9-year-old, when asked how he managed to care for his siblings, replied simply, "I just tried to be the dad." A chilling reminder that in the absence of real care, children are forced to grow up far too soon. The more details emerged, the harder it became for the public to understand. Some asked, were Dupriest and Zielinski victims of circumstance, failed by a system that didn't provide them support? Or were they perpetrators, willing to lock away their children like possessions in a unit made for discarded belongings? The line between desperation and abuse blurred. But the images of that filthy mattress, that bucket, and those 6 frightened children burned into the public's mind. Legal charges and public response. When Charles Dupriest and Isaiah Zielinski were brought into court, the charges were laid out with brutal clarity: 6 counts of child neglect, reckless endangerment, and for Dupriest, illegal possession of a firearm. Each charge carried the weight of years behind bars. But for many observers, the real punishment wasn't in the sentencing guidelines. It was in the details of the complaint, each word a mirror of the horror inside Unit 347. The prosecutor's opening remarks were damning. "This is not about homelessness," she said. "This is about choices." These parents had alternatives, but instead they locked their children in a box. That is not poverty. That is neglect. Her voice echoed in the courtroom, heavy with anger. She described the bucket in the corner, the smell, the darkness, the infant left in the arms of a 9-year-old. She painted a picture not of desperation, but of willful endangerment. The court commissioner agreed. He refused requests for lenient bail, calling the conditions appalling beyond belief. He told the couple directly, "Your children were treated worse than animals. No parent should ever justify this as shelter." Bail was set high, ensuring neither parent could walk free without facing the consequences. As the details spread, outrage erupted across Milwaukee and beyond. Headlines screamed of children locked in a putrid storage unit. Social media filled with disbelief, condemnation, and sorrow. Some demanded maximum sentences. Others demanded reforms to address homelessness. But nearly everyone agreed, what had happened was unacceptable. Child welfare advocates spoke out, warning that cases like this are not isolated. They highlighted a growing crisis in America's cities: families forced into unsafe conditions, children slipping through the cracks of overstretched systems. Yet critics countered, while poverty may explain hardship, nothing excuses padlocks, filth, and children crying in the dark. Neighbors, interviewed by reporters, expressed guilt. One admitted they had heard cries before but assumed it was a pet. Another said they noticed the parents coming and going but never suspected children were inside. The storage facility itself claimed it had no knowledge of the family's living arrangement. But for the public, those explanations fell flat. Too many people had looked the other way. Too many signs had been missed. Why this case matters and systemic angle. The Milwaukee storage unit case isn't just about one family. It's about the uncomfortable intersection of poverty, neglect, and responsibility. Where do we draw the line between survival and crime? Between being a victim of circumstance and being a perpetrator of harm? Experts point to the housing crisis as a critical factor. Across the United States, homelessness has surged. Families are among the fastest-growing segment of the homeless population. Shelters are overcrowded. Affordable housing is scarce. And in desperation, some turn to unsafe alternatives: cars, abandoned buildings, even storage units. This isn't the first case of its kind. In past years, reports have surfaced of people secretly living in units, sometimes with children. But rarely has the neglect been so severe, so undeniable. Child neglect laws in Wisconsin are clear: parents must provide food, shelter, care, and supervision sufficient to protect a child's health. Failure to do so is a crime. Yet for defenders of Dupriest and Zielinski, the law doesn't account for desperation. They argue that society failed them first, by not providing housing, by not catching warning signs earlier, by not offering support before it spiraled this far. But prosecutors remind the public of an essential truth: countless families face homelessness without padlocking their children in dark cells. There were alternatives. Couch surfing with relatives. Seeking emergency services. Even the streets, dangerous as they are, offered more freedom than a locked metal unit. The law, they say, is not meant to excuse, but to protect. And in this case, protection was exactly what the children lacked. The case also exposes gaps in oversight. How could a storage facility, with security cameras and staff, fail to notice? Were there blind spots in patrols? Did anyone see children entering or leaving? The company insists they had no idea. But critics argue storage managers have a responsibility to spot unusual activity. After all, storage units are not designed for human habitation. Signs of residency should have raised alarms long before the 911 call. Then there's the issue of community responsibility. How many neighbors heard cries but said nothing? How many saw the SUV parked for weeks without question? Silence allowed the neglect to continue. And in that silence lies another form of complicity, not criminal, but moral. Because for 6 children, locked in the dark, every ignored sound was another day of suffering. In the bigger picture, this case forces us to reckon with how society treats its most vulnerable. Poverty and neglect are often intertwined. But when children's lives are at risk, the line must be drawn. And Milwaukee's prosecutors have made their stance clear: desperation is not a defense. Endangerment will not be excused. What happens next and verdict questions. As Dupriest and Zielinski sit in custody, the legal process moves forward. Their preliminary hearings have already drawn packed courtrooms, with community members eager to see justice. Prosecutors have made it clear, they will seek full accountability. The defense continues to push the narrative of desperation, painting the couple as parents caught in impossible circumstances. In the coming weeks, the courtroom will hear testimony from firefighters who opened the unit, from medical staff who examined the children, and from social workers documenting the conditions. Each voice will add another layer of detail, another reminder of what was found inside Unit 347. But perhaps the most powerful testimony may come from the children themselves. Even at their young ages, their words carry undeniable weight. Their memories, of padlocks, darkness, and hunger, will hang heavy in the air. Legal experts believe the case will hinge on 2 questions: intent and alternatives. Did Dupriest and Zielinski act out of desperation, truly believing they had no other options? Or did they choose the storage unit for convenience, cutting corners at the expense of their children's well-being? And were there truly no alternatives? Prosecutors insist there were. The defense says otherwise. The jury, when the time comes, will have to decide. For Dupriest, the firearm charge adds additional gravity. Even if found guilty only of the weapons offense, he faces serious time behind bars. For Zielinski, the path is less clear. Some believe she may attempt a separate defense, claiming she was powerless under Dupriest's influence. Others argue her role was equal, that she knowingly placed her children in danger. The law will decide, but public opinion is already divided. The children themselves are now under the care of Child Protective Services. Reports suggest relatives have stepped forward, hoping to take custody. But the trauma these children endured cannot be erased by a change of address. Experts warn they will need years of therapy, stability, and love to recover. For the infant, perhaps, the memories will fade. But for the older ones, the scars will remain. And beyond the trial, questions linger. What responsibility does the storage facility bear? Could stricter oversight have prevented this? Should laws change to prevent anyone from using units as makeshift homes? Already, lawmakers in Wisconsin are discussing new regulations, new penalties, new safeguards. Because while this case is extreme, it is not unique. Across America, hidden in storage units, in abandoned buildings, in parked cars, children live in shadows. And too often, no one notices until it is too late. The Milwaukee storage unit case will not be remembered only for the arrests or the trial. It will be remembered for the haunting image of 6 children, locked away in a place meant for possessions. For the choices that placed them there. And for the community forced to confront how such suffering could exist right under its nose. In the silence of that storage unit, these children cried out, and no one listened until the very end. It was not fire or accident that placed them there. It was decision. It was neglect. And perhaps it was a reflection of a society too willing to look away from its most vulnerable. As the trial continues, one question remains: will the law see this as a crime of poverty, or a crime of cruelty? And more importantly, what do you believe? This is Silent Veil.